Hello and welcome to Filmi Ladies. Today's episode is a companion to our discussion on NRI films that we had about 8 episodes ago, because we're going to talk about foreigners in India instead. We don't have a super catchy way to phrase this, but firangi films, people showing
Yeah.
up in India and making movies. And we have two films that are I think among the most discussed of this category, which is not a huge category as far as I was able to tell, at least for non for feature films, not for documentaries,
Mm.
obviously. So we are going to talk about Darjeeling Limited by the one and only Wes Anderson, which is Pitu's selection, and then I am talking about Bengali Night, which is from the 80s and is full of scandalo and fascinating international and Indian cast. And I can't wait to see if these films have anything in common.
Mm.
Because I bet we'll be able to tease out some commonalities because obviously I think when you get into a topic like this, you're like, oh no, what are these stupid ignorant people gonna say about India this time? And there's maybe a little bit of that in the film I watched, and I have seen Darjeeling Limited, but it's been a long
Mhm.
time, so I'll be interested
Okay.
to hear what you have to say about that. But like going into it, I feel like these are going to be fairly different films, but also
Yeah.
talked about films for different reasons. Let's start with yours and let us start with your general thoughts about Wes Anderson.
Oh my God, I love Wes Anderson, and I have been desperately trying to figure out a way that I could somehow worm him into our episodes because I just love his movies so much. So he made one of my all-time favorite movies, which is The Royal Tenenbaums. I have seen that movie 1 million times, and I love everyone in it. And when that movie came out, I went through my Margot phase, which is where I tried to dress like Gwyneth Paltrow. So I have long black hair, and she has a short blonde bob. So that was a little difficult, but I did wear a side beret. I went to, I can't remember what the store was, but there was some store that had all of those like bodycon dresses with the collar that she wore with the horizontal stripes. They looked horrific on me because I do not have Gwyneth Paltrow's height and body, but whatever, I didn't care. Also, I don't smoke, but I did try to do the really dark eyeliner. So I went through this whole like Margot phase. It was exciting. And then, yeah, so Royal Tenenbaums, I love that movie. And I love Darjeeling Limited. So Darjeeling Limited came out in 2007. And being a Wes Anderson fan, I was doubly excited because I'll watch anything just because he makes it. But the fact that it was set in India and it has Owen Wilson, it has Adrian Brody, it has Jason Schwartzman, like, come on, you have to watch this film, right? And I loved it. What also floors me is that if you look at rankings of like Wes Anderson films, this is considered one of his weakest movies. To which my response is, y'all don't know shit. So I was like, how is this movie not higher ranked than it is? So to be fair, it's not like the reviewers are saying that they think Darjeeling Limited is bad because it's Wes Anderson. Even his worst film is still a very good film, right? Like the bar is very high. But it's considered one of his weaker films. And I really genuinely think, and this could be biased because I love this movie so much, but I think that a lot of the people who don't like Darjeeling Limited basically miss the point of
Mm,
this film because this movie is meant to be a satire, and I think the people who didn't like it just didn't get it, and
mhm.
it like flew over their heads. So in brief, the story of Darjeeling Limited is very basic and simple. Being a Wes Anderson film, of course there's a dysfunctional family because that's what this man does best. So there's the dad and the mom, and the dad has died. It's, of course, Bill Murray, and he has three sons. And those three sons, who are played by the eldest being Owen Wilson, who is magnificent. He's so bossy and irritating in this movie, but like I love him. Then the middle brother is Adrian Brody, and he's just this very emo person. And then the youngest is Jason Schwartzman, who basically has like no voice compared to his older and his middle brother. And these three brothers go on this like journey in India where they board the Darjeeling Limited, which is like a train, but it's also like a hotel. And they're staying there and they're just trying to find themselves because Owen Wilson thinks that's what they need to do because he feels like as estranged brothers, they need to become closer, and the journey will make them closer. Of course, there's a lot of hijinks and adventures and things like that because this is a Wes Anderson movie, so nothing is ever going to be simple. But it's hilarious. And I think the problem that people have with this film is that they feel like it's a movie. Okay, so the negative reviews basically said that this film essentially reduces India to the typical tropes of like
Mhm.
it's dusty and there are cows in the street and everyone drives crazy and there's like rickshaws and there's honking and it's like all the typical stereotypes. And meanwhile, here are these like three white like American men from New York, and they feel like India is just reduced to a caricature in this film. And the Indian characters have, by the way, one of the Indian actors in it is the great Irfan, in a very small but very good role. And Varis Ahluwalia plays the train conductor, and he's hilarious. Like he's so irritated with these three men and he kicks them off the train in a very funny sequence. Um, but again, I think that these critics were missing the point, because I think that this movie is meant to show, it's meant to poke fun at the particular Western person who feels like India is some like magical place where you visit and all of your problems are suddenly solved. And maybe you learn like a Sanskrit mantra and you go to like a temple and suddenly like a wand is waved and like you're this new being, like, you know, this very like eat pray love kind of like ridiculousness. But the whole point of the movie is that that's what Owen Wilson's character thinks, but that's not what actually happens. So there's a very funny sequence in this film where they go to this temple, which Owen Wilson has this like printed and laminated itinerary that his assistant Brendan, who is holed away in a little cabin on the train, is basically like printing stuff out. And they brought the printer with them and a laminator as well, so he's printing everything out. And literally the itinerary is ridiculous. It's like 7 a.m. wake up, 7:10 go for a shower, 7:15 like it's so funny. And in that itinerary they are supposed to go to this temple. I think it's called the Temple of the 1000 cows or something, whatever, some made up cockamamie name. It's in Jodhpur, and they have to go there. And there's a scene where all three brothers are like praying at a temple, and there's all these diyas in front of them. And he's like, hey, you have to put some money in that like box for the deity, and they have to put cash in the box, and they're like praying, but they're so petty. Like they can't focus, they can't concentrate, and they're taking pot shots at each other over, are you wearing dad's belt? And then Adrian Brody's like, yeah. And Owen Wilson is like, well, take it off. It's dad's belt. So it belongs to all of us. It's not just yours. And Adrian Brody has to take the belt off in the temple and give it to Owen Wilson. And then Adrian Brody gets really irritated and he says, I'm going to go pray to another one. And then he walks off looking for like a different deity in the temple. So it's meant to poke fun at that very stereotypical Western tourist who goes to
Mm.
India seeking like spiritual salvation, but it's like they're still the screwed up person that they actually are. So I don't actually think that India is meant to be just like a backdrop. It's meant to be like the satirical story. And I also think that in the movie, India and Indianness and Indian culture actually does end up shaping them to some extent, in the sense that a real tragedy happens in front of them that shakes them and makes them realize that beyond all of this petty bullshit that they are obsessed with and all these like stupid misunderstandings that they have, like there's a whole world out there that you should be trying to explore instead of clinging to your baggage. And in a very satisfying end, after they've been kicked off the Darjeeling Limited, they eventually board a different train. And in order to make the train, because the train is departing the station, they have to run for it. They literally have to throw away all their trunks, all their Louis Vuitton trunks. They just literally like jettison them and then run for the train and board it. Again, symbolizing the fact that they're trying to get rid of all of that baggage. So I just think it's a very sweet movie. It's a hysterical movie. It's heartwarming. I love the dysfunctional relationship with of the three brothers, but also the immense affection between them. Like I find these characters so endearing, even though they're kind of dum dums. And Angelica Houston makes an appearance as their mom, who is now a nun in a Catholic monastery in the Himalayas. It's just a very sweet movie, and I think I don't actually think that it makes India into a caricature. I think it portrays like the vastness of India and the difference of India without necessarily othering Indians.
Mm.
Um, and I think it's a very affectionate, sweet look. Also, the music of this movie is amazing. So Wes Anderson is famously a gigantic Satyajit Ray fan,
Yeah.
and most of the music is either music from Satyajit Ray's own movies, which was composed by Ray himself, or it's like from Merchant Ivory films. Like I think there's music from like Shakespeare Bala and Householder and stuff like that. And then the movie, of course, ends with Champs-Élysées, which is one of my favorite songs. But because I don't speak French, I just nod along to the song, and then I only sing the chorus of like, "Oh, Champs-Élysées." That's all I know. That's the
We
one
learned
line
that
I
in high
know.
school French class.
Nice. And also the visual palette of this movie
Yeah.
is gorgeous. It is
Uh,
beautiful. And Wes Anderson has spoken in interviews about how he loved the fact that it's on a train, because the train itself becomes a set and is just winding through the desert, is just winding through Rajasthan. And of course, it's Rajasthan, very picturesque, very beautiful, all the colors. It's shot in Jodhpur. Um, and there's two interesting behind the scenes things that happen. So there's the scene where they have to take the dead child, which is Irfan's child. They have to shoot a scene where they take it to a villager's house before preparing the body for cremation. And none of the villagers would let them do that because of like superstition and stuff. And so Wes Anderson was like, okay, but like we have to shoot the scene though. So the villagers actually offered to build an actual little house for the set. So they built an authentic little house for them and said, you can use this to shoot that
wow.
scene. So again, I think it's such a great example of like Indian ingenuity, where it's like, okay, we're not going to do this thing you want us to do because we're opposed to this idea,
Yeah.
but we will help you to accomplish your goals in a way that doesn't offend us. I think that was really cool. And Wes Anderson also speaks about how him, Roman Coppola, and I think Jason Schwartzman spent like 2 months in Rajasthan just writing the story on trains. And
Mm.
he decided that instead of being like a control freak and being in charge of every single aspect of filmmaking, he was literally going to let the Indian milieu take over. And
Huh.
so if he's shooting a scene and there happens to be a man who just is walking by with like a pail in his hand, so be it. He wasn't going to try to like really control things too much. And I think that's also one of the things I love about Darjeeling Limited, because one of the criticisms that Wes Anderson has faced is that his movies are all style and very little
Right.
substance. It's his art direction, the eye candy, the attention to visual detail that he gets criticized for. And I think this is probably his one film which is not as curated as his other
Mm.
films are, because at some point he just has to let the Indianness take over. I mean, how exactly are you going to shoot a scene in traffic in Jodhpur in a very clinical way? I mean, this isn't Vanilla Sky where you can like shut down Times Square, right? So you just have to let it happen, and it just, just let go of some amount of control. And I think that actually makes Darjeeling Limited so much fun, because it's one of those movies that every time you watch it, you see something else in the frame that you're not sure if that was intentional or not.
Right. Right.
Um, and also, Wes Anderson was recently at the Cannes Film Festival where they showed Aranye Din Ratri. So
Mm.
I watched an interview where he was chatting with Sharmila Tagore and Dungarpur, who are
He
the
restored it, didn't he?
he did. And he was talking about Arunir Din Radri. He talked about how he wanted to visit India because of Satyajit Ray's films. And he talked about how when he was young, Arunir Din Radri really appealed to him because of these like, fun young people that he saw in it. So I love Wes Anderson. And I think that if people have not seen Darjeeling Limited, they really should. And I think especially Indian people will love this movie. And
Mm.
also it's an opportunity to watch Irfan Khan. How can anyone
Yeah.
like not take advantage of that? But yeah, have you seen Darjeeling Limited?
Yeah, it's been a long time, so I don't remember it very well. And it is,
Mm.
I really love Wes Anderson, although I also have not seen all of his films. So I say that, but then I know there are some things like I didn't see the most recent Asteroid one. I am
Yeah, I
looking
haven't
forward to
either.
the upcoming one. Um, but yeah, and I've always felt the criticism of him as being style over substance is really misplaced. I think it's just that his style is aggressively quirky and whimsical, right? And
It's very
that's
twee.
I think that's what people are reacting to rather than the fact that it's got a style. Like everybody, Martin Scorsese has style,
Yeah.
like, so I think it's because it's like kind of off kilter and not the usual that,
Hmm.
you know, I'm suspicious when people say that he's style over substance. I don't really think it's true.
Yeah.
Also, if you didn't
Also,
want
what does
to
it,
look like a thing, then why are you watching a movie? Just read a book,
yeah.
Movies are
Also,
meant for you.
what does it say about society where it's okay for directors who make thrillers or who make aggressively actiony violent
Oh,
films or
right,
gangster movies, like that's okay, but
right.
God forbid someone make a movie that is like fun and quirky and charming, like, like that's not okay somehow. I find that very suspicious also.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. So I'm a big fan, and I also love the music in the movies. Like for years, the soundtrack to Rushmore lived in my car.
Yes.
He's got really he's got really fun sense of music. So yeah,
Yeah.
and when you said you were going to do this one, I thought like I need to rewatch this. It's been a long time, and I've learned a lot about India since watching this the first time. So I will, I think, get more out of it.
Because in 2027, in 2 years' time, this movie will turn like 30 years old. It's an old movie, you know?
Yeah,
Um, Yeah, it's really, and Wes Anderson is one of those directors that is so amazing because he writes his movies, he directs his movies,
right.
he's very much in charge of the music, even if he doesn't necessarily write the score. And he's very much in charge of the art of it.
Yeah.
Like in one of his interviews, he talked about how there are all these tigers everywhere. And I mean, not everywhere, but like, in art and stuff. And so he asked some like random like villagers in Rajasthan if they would be willing to paint tigers on the insides and outsides of the train. And so they did. And so, like, that's so like such
Cool.
a Wes Anderson thing to do. He's like, just paint tigers for me. They're like, okay.
More tigers. It's
I have
trained
a
me.
tiger
More
on my mug.
tigers. So one of my very favorite actors ever is, in fact, Owen Wilson. I think he's so funny. I love his brother Luke as well.
Yeah.
Wilson, the Butterscotch Stallion, is a friend of mine. I don't think my friend made that up. I think that's out there, but I just think he's so funny. Obviously, he has appeared on our podcast a couple years ago when we talked about Zoolander,
Hansel.
Hansel. But can you talk a little bit about how you feel Owen Wilson does in this film?
He's hysterical. And what was worrisome for me is that I recognize shades of my own temperament in his character because he's so like overbearing and bossy. But the thing about me is that like I'm the oldest daughter, like I'm the oldest granddaughter. So I'm the oldest of all my cousins. And I don't know what it is, but something about being like the oldest of like a gaggle of kids makes you go into this like gear where you have to be in charge and you have to tell everybody what to do and how to do it and how they're going to do it, and you can become so overbearing and annoying so quickly. But what is funny about that birth order is that your younger cousins immediately fall into line, and these are 30-year-olds. They're not young, but they immediately fall into line. And so there's scenes in, and you see that even in this movie where Owen Wilson is so irritatingly like he keeps ordering for his brothers at dinner. Like he's like, I'm gonna have the soup. Should we all have soups? Let's all have soups. And Adrian Brody is like, can you please
Mhm.
stop ordering for me? But like, I do that. Like when I'm in Mumbai and all the cousins are hanging out and we go to a restaurant, I'm like, I think you should get the Mysore masala dosa. What do you think? Right? Like, I feel like that's a good thing for you to get. And I, meanwhile, I'm going to get the veggie uttapam, but you should definitely get the dosa. And you should consider getting chole puri because I know you like it. You just immediately go into that mode. And he does it so well.
That's
There
fun.
is very little that Owen Wilson cannot do. So I love him in, have you seen Meet the Parents?
Yes.
So he is so infuriatingly smug in that movie. And I hate him so much, but like he's acted so well. So he's like, I feel like smugness is a thing that comes very naturally to Owen Wilson because even his character in Zoolander, he's so smug. And
Yeah.
in Meet the Parents as well as in Zoolander, his foil is basically Ben Stiller, whom also I love. But Ben Stiller always plays this almost like young Woody Allen coded, like this neurotic New York person. Like he's also very neurotic in Royal Tenenbaums. And so it's this overbearing quality that he has, but at the same time, he has this almost like surfer dude look
Oh yeah.
because of the blonde hair and the nose and the way
Yeah.
he draws.
Yeah.
And so it's very contradictory, but also beguiling, but also interesting. I don't know. I just think Owen Wilson is so great in this role, and I cannot imagine anyone else doing it. And then Adrian Brody is so sulky and emo and just like hilarious in this movie. And then Jason Schwartzman is just kind of like the ping pong. Like he's looking at both of his brothers and
Oh
not
yeah.
figuring out what to do. Like he has no control. He's like the classic, like the youngest kid who wants to act out and doesn't know what to do. So this movie is also like a very good exploration of like sibling relationships, which
Yeah.
I personally have not experienced in like biological terms because I'm an only child, but because I have cousins that I'm very close to and I'm the oldest, I've definitely seen how that birth order plays out. And I find it funny how, despite cultural differences, like these are obviously American actors in an American movie, portraying an American family. It's all over the world. It's the same thing, though. Like this is also how Indian siblings behave. So yeah, I love Owen Wilson in this. Is he like one of your favorite actors?
Yeah,
He's
definitely.
great.
Definitely. I think he's very, very funny. And again, I've not seen all of his films by any means, but every time I see him, I'm delighted and I feel like he does a great job at these different, because this character is different than the Tenenbaum's character, who's
Yeah.
different from Hansel.
He also has a very distinctive voice, which is like so
I mean, those
nasal,
Shanghai Noon movies are so funny, and it's
right?
because of him. But like, yeah, and I mean, we've all heard the wow over and over
Yeah, oh my
again, but there's
God.
so much more to him than that. But he's just such an unlikely movie star in a way. I feel like I just think
Yeah.
he's a hoot.
He's also like likable, but also unlikable at the same time, like simultaneously. Whereas
Yeah.
like Ben Stiller is always likable to me. And every time I see Owen Wilson, I'm like, I love you, but also you're so infuriating, like in a good way. Yeah.
That's great. That's
And
great.
while there's all this like comedy and hijinks happening, Irfan Khan, in a way, brings the only like serious note in this movie, right? Because he
Mm,
is the bereaved father whose child has died, and Irfan's role is so small. And of course, I know Irfan is this movie. I have seen this movie like 1 million times. So this is not a surprise to me. But the advantage of having goldfish brain is that I never see him coming. And when he sees, I'm like, ah, it's Irfan. I love him. But then I'm sad for him because he's a
oh,
bereaved dad, but he's
yeah.
so good, so raw in this film. And there's the scene where he's like bathing his dead child's body and preparing the child for cremation. It just like breaks your heart. He's so great. This is also one of the criticisms that this movie got. Like one of the reviewers said, why does a brown child have to die in this film for the brothers to realize the gravity of life? And I was like,
Yeah.
okay, that's a fair criticism, but I also think that these men are so up their booty, that nothing short of a, a waste of a young child's life is gonna,
Mm,
snap them out of their like bubble. I mean, nothing short of that is gonna do it for them because they're just nothing else is gonna matter. They're so spoiled and
yeah.
they're so petty. So I don't know. I take that criticism with a grain of salt. I think it's
Mm,
valid, but it's okay.
mm,
I also will say, like, as an Indian person, like so many movies, not that it's a very big category, but so many films that are made by foreigners about India or are set in India can be very, very annoyingly triggering just because they're
sure.
so overtly racist. This movie is not triggering at all. If you're an Indian person, you will have a smile on your face. I think it's adorable and darling.
Mm,
And if you haven't seen it, please go watch it. I don't think a lot of Desi people have seen this film because I just don't hear a lot of Desi people talking about it. And I think that's a shame because it's so funny, affectionate, and human, and anyone who has a close relationship with their siblings or their cousins, I think, will appreciate that dysfunctionality. Where I always like to say, like, you know I'm grateful for my family because even when I'm being an asshole, they still love me. And this film does kind of underscore that too, where it's like, ugh, you're annoying, but you know what, you're my brother, so like fine. So yeah. Now your movie, is that made by a French person?
yes.
Who is this French person, and should we know him? Is he famous?
Nicholas Klotz is the director, which does not sound super French, but he is indeed French.
Okay.
I don't think I know most of his movies at all, which is not saying much because I am not up on French cinema. So I'm not sure if you should know him or not.
I don't know.
Yeah, so this is based on a novel by a Hungarian scholar who was in India for a while, wrote this somewhat fictionalized but not really account of his time there. The woman about whom he writes found out about the novel after it was published, and she wrote her own response to it, which is in Bengali primarily. Her name is Maitri Devi.
Mm,
She was a student under Tagore in some way or other, which comes up in the movie. The Romanian man is named, I will not pronounce this correctly because I don't know how to pronounce anything in Romanian, but Mircea Eliade. And
okay.
her book is also loosely the base of Hum Dilde Chuke Sanam,
And Wasadin.
we'll say. Yeah. Um, so this is a, I've not read either of the novels. I think there's something to be said about the ethics of this story having been made, I think, because it's based on this thing that was refuted later by the less powerful person in the
Mm.
situation in the story. So for those who don't know, the story is Hugh Grant. Yes, Hugh Grant at the full power of his late 80s, early 90s hair. Like there's
I
so many
know.
scenes in this movie. I was just like, we were powerless in the 50s. As a global society, many of us were just powerless in front of this
We were at the mercy.
beautiful brown, thick, wavy hair. Um,
So I refuse to call men who have gorgeous hair, like I refuse to call their hair. I have to call it Zulfe.
oh yeah, he Zulfe.
He has Zulfe.
More, yeah, Hugh Grant for
Yeah.
sure is Zulfe, and he still does, even though it's graying and everything.
Yeah.
And he's got, I mean, the beautiful accent. He's a beautiful human being to look at, and he's another of my favorites. I think he's an amazing
Same.
actor, absolutely amazing. Not the world's best human being, but an amazing
Right.
actor. Um, and he plays an engineer who is working in Calcutta, and the company he works for is run by Sumitra Chatterjee, who is a, Bengali, rich Bengali man. And um, poor Hugh Grant's character, it comes to stay with the Bengali family for a while. He gets sick and then he comes to stay with their family. They're not in Calcutta anymore. They're off in the countryside somewhere. And he
Mm.
is smitten with the daughter, the older daughter of the house, who is, of course, played by Supriya Pathak, looking
I love
absolutely
her.
ravishing. Like the two of them together are beautiful. He's going to try to teach her French. She's going to try to teach him Bengali. They fall in love. And I don't want to spoil this because I think a lot of people have not seen this movie. It ends very badly for both of
Oh,
them, very badly for both of them, because of course this will not do. This will not.
right.
She would never be allowed to have any kind of relationship with him. And he, in my view, he is portrayed as a little bit on the lost side. So I'm never really convinced that I think he's smitten with her. I don't think he really knows her enough to love her, right? Now,
Mm,
it can also be said that, marriages in Indian cinema have been based on far less time spent
hmm.
together than these people do, or arranged marriages, right? But this clearly is an ill-fated
Yeah.
situation. Um, her mother is Shabana Azmi, who, when she gets wind of a few things, is exactly the way you think Shabana Azmi in such a character would be. Sumitra Chatterjee is kind of he doesn't seem to be paying super close attention a lot of the time, so that's interesting. So like man of the house and the patriarchal power is kind of a thread of this. Hugh Grant also has some friends back in Calcutta who are of various international denominations, so to speak, and they have a bit of kind of drama and goofiness happening. Um, it's set in the 30s.
Oh, okay.
So, so, and based on what I could pick up, there's really nothing about independence really
Mm,
mentioned in this movie, and it is primarily in English, so I do think I got most of it.
mm.
There's a pretty good print on YouTube if people want to watch it. Um, it is, I find Humdil de Chukasanam fairly annoying.
Mm.
I remembered finding this annoying, but it wasn't as much as I remembered. But you do just kind of want to pat them on the head and be like, "Oh, children, this will not end well for you," because it's just, just take a look around. This is not gonna happen.
Yeah.
I was, how is India presented in this film? Well, it is the background for a white man of privilege stumbling around. That is true. he's also a
Mhm.
laborer of a kind. I mean, he's a white collared laborer, right? But he
Right.
works for an Indian man. So he is not
Mm.
particularly in the power situation here. And I think it's implied that India is more than he could handle. But
Mm.
also, France might have been more than he could handle. Some other place too, right? He's a, slightly lost young man who thinks he knows more than he does. And,
Mm.
so staying at home in England might have been more more than he could handle too, right? So I don't know how much of it is specific to India, but obviously the relationship between the two and the pressures upon it, those are, I think, fairly distinctively Indian. The fact that
Mhm.
it has some urban scenes, but then some more remote scenes, and we get forests. We're in the forests of Bengal, so it's not like rural poverty. It's not that kind of Indian
Mhm.
setting, but you are among rich people, which is interesting. Very educated people.
Mhm.
Tagore comes up a lot. I had it on Twitter, and I'm starting it again on Bluesky with hashtag Tagore spotting. Whenever I see a portrait of Tagore in the background of a film, I try to take a picture. This movie has Supriya Patak full on talking to a portrait of Tagore.
Oh,
So
good Lord.
it's a lot. And he kind of makes fun of her for it. Like he doesn't understand her devotion to this. He's like, he's just this old man. What are you doing loving this old man? Like he doesn't understand. And as a, foreign person who has visited Bengal a couple times, I'm like, well, do I understand it? No, not exactly, but like man's a like he's like a saint, right? So like
Right.
this is not some weird, and yes, this is in the 30s. This is a long time ago, but
Right.
still, like I don't think it's that complicated.
Right.
You have Shakespeare, like you have revered literary and philosophical figures. Like this is just a
Right.
political figures, whatever. This is a thing. So anyway, so
But
this
I feel like
that's
in
Grant, you dumb dumb.
I feel like in any society though, if you were caught talking to a portrait of anybody, you would be considered a little bit of an oddball.
Maybe a little bit, but she's also, she's a teenager, right? She's like
Oh,
yeah, she's an upset.
okay.
Well, they say how old she is, I think, and I don't remember. I apologize. But she's got a like we were talking about when we did our Bronte adaptations, right? Like she's got her little like teenage crush on Tagore a little bit, but she also admires him as a scholar and
Right.
things like that. So I think they just kind of assume she's an obsessed teenage girl,
Mm.
I think.
And this is for some reason, I've not seen this movie, but for some reason, this is giving me slight like Lutera vibes.
Yes.
Is that right? Like it's
hmm
okay.
She's a
Because,
much more of a live wire than Sonakshi's
okay.
curious, but yeah, there is some similarity there with the interloper in the Zamindari
Hmm.
society a little bit, a little bit. Now I
The
don't know
one
if
that
her
is
dad
looked
is
at with
actually
suspicion.
a Zamindari, but I mean they have a big country estate, so I assume he
And
must,
they're probably zamindars.
in addition to owning an engine like a roadworks company or
Right.
whatever. So um
Also, regarding Hugh Grant being lost, I wouldn't say that I am like some scholar on like Hugh Grant's filmography, but every movie of his that I've ever seen, he's always lost.
that just comes up a few times for sure. I also
There's
thought
just something about his aura. Like if he ever played a person who was like in the know, I would be shocked.
I'm sure some of his later things are like that, like when
Yeah,
he's spies and so English government officials.
right.
Um, Another person in this movie with a much smaller role is John Hurt.
Who's John Hurt?
John Hurt is an English actor who is
Okay.
hella decorated. I know him best from playing Caligula in I, Claudius from the 70s. If you have
Okay.
ever watched I, Claudius.
Mm-mm.
Oh, Pitu, you would love I, Claudius because you love
Really?
ancient Rome. Oh,
Okay.
yeah, we'll talk about
But
that
it's
later.
not super violent, is it?
No,
Okay, because there's a
70s.
horrible HBO show called Caligula, which I would not touch with a barge pole
No, no,
because
no.
it's supposed
This
to be
is
like
70s
hella.
British TV. That's
Okay. Oh yeah, it's British. Okay, I can watch it.
so it's fine. I was like, Caligula and Apu are in the same film. This cast is really something. And he plays a photographer who kind of blows into Calcutta and is a bit of a jerk. And Hugh Grant invites him to the his boss's household to visit, and he's fairly inappropriate in his visit, and he
Oh no.
also is obsessed with Supriya Patak and like wanting to take her picture all the time, and it's very awkward. So Hugh Grant stands in contrast to him, like he's more appropriately behaved than that, but he is, he not as aware as you think he would be, given that he's lived in India for at least a while. Um,
Right.
but back to the, like the authorship of this and the, whose story is being told her here.
Mm.
The story, I think, is from a fairly objective perspective in the film, but I can very much accept the argument that because she is underage, and so, although, this is a culture with child brides, let us also,
Right.
so like she's not that young, and she in fact has a little sister who also has a crush on Hugh Grant and is like talking to him about wanting to marry him and stuff like that, but no one takes her seriously because she's like 8 or
Right.
something. So whose perspective is this? Like it is hers in some ways, but we follow him to meeting the family, and we follow him back out of the family again at
Mm,
the end of the film. So instead of her being the center and he comes into her life, we see it, more from his perspective. But I
mhm.
do think, the fact that Maitreyi Devi wrote, kind of a response to this and told it in her own words is really important, and I would like to read that.
So I have two questions, and they're kind of connected. One, how exactly does this differ from the plot of Wo Saath Din slash Hum Dil De Chuke Sanam? Because kind of the point of those movies is to portray the husband as like this very special, amazing person who is okay with his wife still being in love with her erstwhile lover, and then like attempting to like reunite them or whatever, which sounds very different from what you're narrating because I have not heard any mention of a husband character for Supriya Pathak. So that's my first question.
Yeah,
My
go ahead.
Yeah, and then what was my second question? It was something connected. Oh yes. So what exactly was the controversy? Like, why? What was Maitreyi Devi's problem with it? Was she, for instance, alleging that he implied a stronger, deeper relationship than what they
I
actually
I think
had?
so. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm just looking at Wikipedia, but the she was told the book implied a sexual relationship between
Mm,
her and this person. That does not happen. Um,
okay.
so she found it shocking that what he
Mm,
what he depicted in there, and so she calls it fairly fantastical and things like
okay. I mean, as a person who has not watched this movie, I would imagine that there was an implied sexual relationship based on the title alone.
that.
I mean, the fact that it's called Bengali Nights, I
Hmm.
would be like there and like this air of like a forbidden love affair that society disapproves of. I mean, I'm assuming that there is a fair amount of like sneaking around and
There is. Yeah.
rendezvous of some
And I
kind.
think
So
I felt like the film was open-ended about whether there was a sexual relationship or not,
okay.
but it's certainly they kiss and things like that. So
Hmm.
I will also note
Perhaps the book was more overt.
it could be, yeah. The book was the author made her a promise that it would not be published in English in her lifetime, and it only came out in English after her death.
Oh, okay.
He was a scholar at the University of Chicago, and she was invited there to speak about Tagore, and she confronted him about this, which is when these came out. And then the University of Chicago published the two kind of in a companion later
Okay.
after her death. So um, I've never seen Vosat Din, so I can't speak to that. Humdilde Chukisanam. I mean,
It's
you
the
have a
same
woman
story, FYI.
similar, yeah. So you see her similar to this film, I mean.
Mm,
Daughter of a wealthy household, a foreigner comes. Now, it's a very much a foreigner in this one,
yeah.
and Saman is, from Italy, right?
I
Is
have
of
no
Indian
idea.
extraction or mixed Indian and Italian background or whatever. So he's kind of less foreign.
Yeah.
He can speak Hindi for starters because,
Yes.
in this movie, they speak in English
Right.
because he doesn't really know any Bengali, which I think is also an indication that he's not paying attention to the world around him when
Hmm.
he's there. Although it's also, I can imagine based on the little I know, and others please correct me, it seems likely that a business in engineering might well have operated primarily in English, at least
Yeah.
management or administrative level in the
Mhm.
1930s. So like, oh, I don't know. Um, there is there's no happy ending in this one, like in Humdilde Chukesanam.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I don't really want to live in a world where you can compare Hugh Grant and some unknown characters, right? Like, not to be dramatic. I'm being dramatic. But that very different vibes of
Oh
that.
yeah, 100%.
Very different vibes because, you know, uh, yeah, speaking of movies that have a lot of style over substance, as we've spoken many times.
Yes.
So that,
We're not Bhansali fans
very
here.
different flavors. Now, again, I have not read either book, so I don't know what this pulled out of how accurate it is to which book.
Mhm.
So, um, Yeah, so I can't speak to Vosadden at all.
Hmm.
Did that answer both your questions?
Yes, but I also well, so Supriya Pathak has no husband in this movie then.
All right. So at the end, okay, spoilers ahoy. So if you don't want to be spoiled, tap out of this conversation. At the end of this film, her father gets wind of what's going on via her
Mm,
mother, because her mother confronts her and she lies to her mother, and her mother's like, yeah, clearly I don't believe you. And he is thrown out of the house. They put him in the family car and sent him back to Calcutta like post haste.
mm,
Then later he shows back up in Calcutta. He's a broken man. He wades into the river and is yelling her name in the river, like he's very upset to be parted from her. And then kind of basically seems like a drunk, broken wreck after that. Now, this man who was affiliated with the family, who it was unclear to me whether or not he was kind of her unspoken fiance or her intended or something, but this Indian man comes to the city again in the car and says, I have news for you about what's happened. And from what I understood, the father has beaten her very badly for this behavior and then given her a whole bunch of talk about, they say shame and honor in English, but this isn't, is it? This isn't a
yeah.
film. And basically married her off post haste to someone
Mm,
who would still be willing to accept her.
mm,
But I don't think it was that same guy. And I should have rewound and watched it again. So please don't quote me on that, but that's the basic gist I got. It's sad at
okay.
the end that she's been physically abused and also, of course, berated up,
Hmm.
down center for this. So she is bearing the brunt of all the punishment for this, which
Hmm.
is not surprising. We don't know anything, I don't think, about Hugh Grant's parents or family or connections or anything.
Mm,
He seems to just sort of be here without a whole lot of ties in any which
mm.
way. Um, and we see him kind of stumble off down the street and go of a Calcutta street at night and then go around a corner and then some boys like playing football kind of come around the corner back towards the camera. We don't see him again. So I don't know if
Oh.
we're supposed to think he's like drowning his sorrows, if he has collapsed, if he's been struck by a car. Like I don't know what we're supposed to
Mm.
think is happening to him, but that's the end of the story. So
Is he showing up at Chandramukhi's kotha? We don't know what's happening.
he
Are
probably
we channeling Devdas?
maybe should. He maybe should. Yeah, I did think about Devdas a little bit. I'm like, what would this guy have any patience for Devdas? And I don't think he would. I think he would
Okay.
annoying as well, not perhaps realizing his own annoyingness, but
Right.
annoying in a different way.
How interesting. I've never considered watching this movie. And initially, okay, so I got confused. So initially, when we were discussing on WhatsApp our choices for this episode, and you told me this movie, I confused it with a different movie. I can't remember the title, but I remember watching the poster of it. It has Nandita Das in the water in what looks like a river, and there's this like American actor, and he's like holding her from behind, like they're embracing.
Huh.
And I can't remember what that movie is, but that's what I
Oh,
thought you were
Before
gonna.
the Rains. I see it.
Yes.
I see it here.
Who is the actor? Is he the guy
Um,
from Bride and Prejudice?
no, I don't think so. I think it's Linus Roach.
Okay.
But Jennifer Ehle from Pride and Prejudice is in it. Or Jennifer Ehle,
Okay.
I think is how she
So
said.
this is the movie I was thinking of. Like
Yeah.
for whatever reason, this poster was in my head. And when you said Bengali
Same.
Nights, I was like, ah yes, Nandita Das and the dude in the river and the water and blah blah blah. And then when you started talking about it, I was like, wait, what? What is happening?
Oh, I would watch. I would watch. That looks interesting. I didn't, and it's directed by Santosh Sivan. So
It's supposed to have terrible reviews though, just FYI, because I remembered one
I
time
won't be stopped by
considering
things like
it.
that.
Okay, so would you rate this movie, which sounds far more promising than that one, would you rate this movie as like a good one? And I know that that is a loaded question because good means
Oh,
different things. Like I don't mean, I'm not talking about this so bad it's good category. I'm talking
no,
about
no,
like, do you
no.
think it's a good movie?
Um, I mean, everyone can take a drink when I say the word. I always say I certainly find it interesting. And so in that regard, I would say it's good. Like there's something a little
Okay.
different going on here than most other films I've seen. It's very different from Whom Dode Chuka Sanam.
Mm,
Even if you put aside the scandal over the writing and publishing of it and the
yeah.
the misrepresentation of it or the he said she said of it, um it is kind of a culture clash movie, but it's framed in this very much of a romance kind of way.
Mm,
It gets at ignorance, it gets at cultural conventions, it gets at what we choose to let ourselves see and not, because like neither of these people, like she also would have known better, right? Like
hmm
she's not, she's a teenager. Come on, and she's a scholar in her own way, like a poet, it's just silly. Like, don't get too into poetry is one of the lessons. The poetic types, they lead themselves astray. It has lessons on parenting, I think, to like you got to pay a little more attention to what's going on in your own house. Although some of the time the dad is also ill, I believe, but like the mom didn't
Mm,
really catch on either. So
mm,
um I so yes, I would cautiously say it's good. I like it took a couple, I don't know, like 15, 20 minutes to really get going to me. It took him going to their house.
mm.
Beginning, it's kind of him with some of his other foreigner friends, and they're not dirty hippies because hippies don't really exist yet, but they're like dirty, like kind of living in this like flat with too many people and drinking too much and smoking too much, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Like wayward young people, which is not that interesting to me.
Single young men with a
Yeah,
little bit of disposable income.
yeah, exactly. And like they don't I think they very much don't think about what they're doing or where they are or what it
Yeah.
means to be where they are. Um, so yes, I would call it a good movie. You can live your life without watching it for sure. But if you are interested in, like I've said before, one of my favorite microgenres of Indian cinema is people looking for things in Calcutta. This is not quite that, but like, Calcutta as a character in a movie is interesting to me, even though I don't really know that much about the city. Like, and this
I
cast is
know.
amazing, right? So like watch it for them. You very, I very rarely have seen Sumitra Chatterjee speaking much English. So that was other than in interviews, but like in a film. So that was really interesting to me. Shabana Azmi being in this sort of Bengali milieu I mean, it's international, but it's a Bengali milieu, right? That was interesting to
Hmm
see the depiction of a young woman's interest in poetry and scholarship and how she, sees herself as how she is how that is conveyed in relationship to the Great Tagore. Like that's interesting.
hmm
So yeah, I would say this is a good movie, but again, you don't need to like add it to the top of your list or anything. But if you wanted to look at, movies about young women scholars, you could add, and I wouldn't have remembered that about this film until I had rewatched it. So but yeah, and I did think I don't remember how this came to mind for me for this topic, other than I had seen it, and I'm always trying to shoehorn more Bengali movies into this
hmm
podcast, so it was kind of fun to think about it for that. And it is different than Stupid American Goes to India to Find Themselves.
Right.
It's not that. It has a few similarities to that in that we have a white person of at least some privilege who is bashed about by his own decisions, but it's very much
Mm,
his own decisions
right.
in India. And he finds himself swept away by something or someone Indian, which I think
Mm,
that maybe is the theme that and we do see I I thought, and I would love to know what Indians think of this, that India is not a flat depiction in this at all.
mm,
I felt like I recognized this from Bengali films that I've watched, for example. Now, I'm
mm.
sure you could argue that some of those are flat too. So I'm looking at flat. It's just a slightly different flat or whatever. But and please weigh in on this. But I think it's a relatively thoughtful presentation of India as far as I can tell for what that's
Mm, okay. I do find that an interesting commonality, not just in like books or movies that talk about like a non-Indian person coming to India, but even like Indian friends. I mean, even like American friends or European friends that I have that their experience when they go to India. There's this very common thread about this feeling of being swept away,
Oh
of no
yeah.
longer being in control, and I understand that too because
Yeah.
even though I am Indian, I was completely raised in Nigeria, and I grew up in a very small, tiny little town town. My parents are the city dwellers. Like they're the ones from Mumbai. I'm not. I'm from a small town. So when I would go to India on my summer holidays, because my family lived in South Mumbai, it was scary to me. I couldn't cross the road by myself. It was noisy, it was loud. I grew up in cornfields.
Mhm.
Mumbai is not cornfields.
No.
And it almost felt like there was too much happening. And we didn't, where I grew up, we didn't have like shopping centers, we didn't have malls, we had one movie theater, and that primarily played like Nigerian movies, and the occasional Hollywood blockbuster would come. And then I went to Mumbai, and it's like, especially in South Mumbai, where my family's from, it's like every 5 steps there's a restaurant, there's a shop, there's a thing, there's a famous department store, there's Akbar Release. It's like it's very much like country bumpkin comes to big city. Meanwhile, my parents would be so chill. They would be like, "Oh yes, we're going to go to Akbar Release and we're going to shop, and then we're going to go to Fort, to our favorite like restaurant, to have like Anglo-Indian food." And I was like, "Who are you people? I want my parents back. I want like my sweet, cute, innocent Nigerian parents back. I don't know who you city slickers are." So I kind of get it. I understand when people say that, like when my European friends have talked about going to India, and they're like, and I think someone, I can't remember if this is something I read in an article or if this is an actual sentence that maybe Greta said. Someone said that India is basically, it's like the world, but it's on steroids.
Sure.
So everything is amped up, everything is just more vibrant, more colorful, everything is more, and it's very easy to get overstimulated.
There's also,
And so
I think the one of the senses I have had is there are clearly systems at work.
mhm,
I cannot figure out what they
decipher.
are.
Yeah.
So it's not that things don't work. They do work. They just work in a very different way. Like,
Hmm.
what is the system for getting a train ticket and getting on the train?
Right.
I don't know. But
Yeah.
there's a system because people are getting on the train and every time,
Yeah.
or what we've talked about this, like, how do you cross the road?
Yeah.
Oh, go with the family? I think,
What I learned through, like, until I actually moved to India, and
yeah,
I've lived in India for 5 years, but until then, and then once I actually moved to India, I realized that instead of wasting my precious brain energy on trying to figure stuff out, I was just going to lean on people. So I
right.
would basically just approach people and be like, "Hi, I need to do this. Please help." And everyone would help me. Someone or the other would help me. Some auntie would hold my hand and she would explain to me, or
Yeah.
people would escort me to the place
Yeah.
I needed to go to. And they would be like, "Now you do this." And if I still look like a complete dum dum, they would talk to the official on my
Oh,
behalf.
that's very
And
nice.
basically they would exchange this look of like, "Oh, stupid little person. Okay, fine." And then, they would take pity on me and do the thing that I needed done. So at this point, I've just learned, just go look like a complete dum dum and rely on people's kindness, and things will
And I
happen.
think that that idea of there are systems working that you either can't figure out or don't even understand are there, that is in both of our films.
Right.
And I think that you can say that to a limited amount about all sorts of places that are foreign to
Yeah.
you, whoever you are, right? Like, I don't super understand necessarily everything in Britain either, but I can get at it a lot
Mm.
more easily than I can get
Yeah.
at it in India or wherever. Like when I lived in Canada for graduate school for 2 years, yes, the US and Canada have a whole lot in common, but there were still things I was like, what?
Yeah.
Um, so but India, because of the amped upness, because of I mean, honestly, the heat,
Yeah.
everything harder for a lot of us, the
Hmm.
amount of sunshine or just the visual stimulation of how much is out on the streets, like how much of
Hmm.
life is lived outside.
Yeah.
Like it just kind of, your brain
Yeah.
can. So I think that India is struck famous for being disorienting to many, many, many,
Yeah.
many, many kinds of people. Not all people,
Yeah.
but like I think no matter where you're from, India has a can really boggle your
Yeah.
and it has been doing so for millennia. It seems like. So I think it has, I think that, I'm sure many people have written about this, like films made by one group of people about life in another
Mm.
country to which they are foreign in some way. And like, what are some of the commonalities? And obviously discombobulation is going to be
Hmm.
a
Yeah.
thing. Like in the case of my film, it's very much Alan is this character's name, Hugh Grant's name. He seems to be able to navigate life in India actually fairly well in a lot of
Hmm.
ways, partly because he has a job for an Indian company. I'm sure that's, or
Hmm.
company operating there. But there's this cultural stuff that he is foolish not to have sort of discerned and or somehow heard about or anything,
Right.
right? Like, or just, yeah, how had he not observed, like, when he first meets the daughter, how quiet she's being, or like she's bringing them tea, but she doesn't speak, for example, like,
Hmm.
wait, you think you're going to marry this woman? No, you're not. You dumb
Right.
dumb. Like, so you know, it's interesting. This movie does not particularly have India more is more to it.
Mm,
It does have a serious disconnect of how things actually work versus what this person hopes
mm.
will happen in his kind of romantic naivete.
And I wonder if that naivete also causes like exasperation to people. So, for instance, one of the most entertaining people in Darjeeling Limited is actually the train conductor slash hotel manager person played by Varis Alwalia. He is hysterical. The man does not crack a smile. And he's this like turbaned, handsome Sardar man. And he's like so well dressed in his like bandgala and everything. He's like fashionable and fit and everything. And he's always the grumpy camel because he finds these brothers infuriating because they flout all the laws. Like it literally says everywhere, "Dhumrapan nishedh hai," no smoking. It says no smoking in all caps, red paint, and they're smoking. And then they all pick up like these medicines. Like I don't know what these dubious medicines are. They look like drugs to me, but there's these like tinctures that they have that they pick up in markets, and they're like putting these tinctures in their mouth. I don't know. Is it ganja? I have no idea. And then there's this one scene where he comes into their berth or room or whatever it's called, because it's like a separate room
Oh
kind of
yeah.
cabin, and he walks around there and he's like examining it the way a jailer would. And he's like pointing at the tinctures and he's like, "Where did you get that? That's illegal." Then he points at the cigarettes and he's like, "No smoking." And then he looks at the berth and he's like, "What is that?" And then Adrian Brody's character goes to a market and just on a lark, because it's Adrian Brody, he buys a snake. So there's a sign that says like poisonous, dangerous snakes. So of course, being a dum dum, he's like, "Oh, I'm gonna buy one." So he goes and buys this extremely poisonous snake and puts it in a box. And literally, the box has like danger written on it and like a skull and crossbones. And he keeps that in his room because reasons. And none of his brothers are like, "Why do you have a snake?" Owen Wilson is like, "Oh yeah, he bought a snake." And then of course the snake escapes. And that's when Varis Alwalia's character has to go and find the snake because the brothers are like losing their marbles. And it's so funny. He goes into like the dining car section, comes back with the smallest spatula, and he's just like, approaches with the spatula, goes into the cabin, there's something happening, and then he catches it. And then one of the like, you wouldn't call her a flight attendant, but she's kind of like an attendant. Like she brings some food and stuff. She has to bring like a silver bartan. So she literally brings a bartan with a lid, and he puts the snake in the bartan, closes the lid, and tells her, "Go throw it out of the train." And Adrian Brody's like, "Is he gonna kill my snake?" And I'm like, "What is wrong with you?" And this man is like, "Get off my train. You brought a poisonous snake on here. Get off my train." And they're like, "You're throwing us off the train?" I'm like, "Yes. How clueless are you?" So I think there's also this like maybe sense of exasperation where people are like, "Go away. We're trying to live our life. We're trying to do our job. And you're just like adding to our headaches and we can't deal with you."
Your movie, I'm an interesting thing that's just popped up to me is like,
Yeah.
so your characters are discombobulated partly because they're in India, but also partly because their dad has died, right?
Yeah.
So you've got grief kind of contextualizing the like in your movie, and
Yeah.
a sort of nonsensical romantic streak in mind. So these are not people primarily dealing with India, they're dealing with themselves in India, which
And
is
my characters are also drinking a lot and
right.
taking shady medicines that
Yes,
are kind of like drugs. So they're also not really in their right minds
right,
either.
right. Were there any other films that you kind of considered for this one?
Okay, so part of my resolution, which I have only met halfway for last year and this year, was that instead of doing this stupid thing I do where I watch my favorite movies 1 million times until I
Ah,
can quote them in my sleep, I was like, "Pitu, get over it. Start watching newer films, start exploring," which I have made some strides in that regard. I've watched like some 4 or 5 Malayalam films where I had never watched any. So I'm making some strides. So as a part of that, I wondered if I should watch Eat, Pray, Love for this episode.
no.
This is a movie and a book I have studiously avoided. And
Same.
I,
Same. I have never consumed any of it. It sounds awful. And like I was very anti that before
same.
I even knew I was watching Indian films. I was like, this sounds like some bullshit.
Yeah. But so the book came out, Eat, Pray, Love came out, I think I want to say like
Looking
2006
that
or
up. The
something.
film is 2010.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but the book was
2006.
2000.
Okay,
Yeah.
right.
And so I lived in Chicago at that time. So both the book and the movie came out during uh, my Chicago years. And I was a part of a book club. And our book club wanted to do Eat, Pray, Love. And I was, and 88% of book clubs are basically like, it's women only. And all the women in Chicago loved this book. And then and I studiously dodged it because I was like, I am not reading this book. I'm sure this book is going to like give me blood pressure problems. So I
Absolutely.
avoided it. I avoided all the nonstop chatter about it. Then the movie came out, and then all the people who hadn't read the book in like 2006, they all discovered the book because of the movie. And then again in 2020, 2010, there was this nonstop chatter about it. And I was like, every promo I've seen for this film, every clip I've seen of this film is infuriating. This film exoticizes Italy, India, and Bali, way to offend people from three countries all at once. Like that is an achievement. So I seriously avoided it. So there was a part of me that I was like, okay, but like in the interest of science and cinema, I should perhaps consider watching this film for this episode. But then my desire to have a good mental balance took over, and I decided instead to reward myself with a rewatching of Darjeeling Limited.
Very good.
And I knew none of the Merchant Ivory movies were eligible because, like, Ismail Merchant is Indian, so it's like that doesn't really count. I did also for 2 seconds consider, isn't there a movie called Exotic Marigold Hotel? The
Yeah.
best exotic.
Exotic. Mhm.
But I also didn't know if that was going to annoy me. I mean, I like
I've
Judi
seen that.
Dench.
It might well, and I wouldn't fault you for it at all.
Okay.
I was talking about that movie with someone the other day who was saying
Mm.
a person might enjoy it more if they see it as a as like a metaphor for the fall of the British Empire or something like that.
Okay.
Again, like these amazing actors are in this,
Yeah.
but so you're like, oh, this is beautifully made, but still highly ick in
Yeah.
ways. So if any of our listeners have opinions about Best Exotic Marigold Hotel, which did so well, they made a second one, which I
Oh,
have.
really?
Um,
Okay.
yeah,
It's
and again,
also the title I hate.
seen it, but I haven't seen it for a while. Yeah,
Mm,
and I'm trying to remember if I remember correctly, they have an Indian character actually come up with the name, but it's all about who wrote it. That's not.
right. It just
So
sounds so cringe. It's like the
yeah,
best exotic marigold hotel. I was like, that title does not give me any confidence in watching this movie.
not
So
Marigold Hotel.
avoided that.
Just say
Yeah.
Marigold. It'll be fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm,
I, one thing about that movie that struck me, that I remember striking me, is that the European, but then specifically British
mm,
concept of India is not the same. Like the American one that I grew up with is different, right? Because
right.
the history is different, the relationships are different, and the length of time it takes to get there is different.
Hmm.
So I hear of Europeans who are like, I want a beach holiday, I'm going to Goa. Whereas it takes you would not do that from the United States unless you have some specific reason or a tie to Goa because it's too far, right?
Yeah.
You go to somewhere in South America or Florida or whatever, right? Or
Well,
even Spain, but you wouldn't necessarily go all the way to Goa. So
Well, also when I lived in New York, I would go to the Caribbean all the time because in winter there's just so many incredibly cheap. Like you can
right,
fly from New York City, like JFK, to like Jamaica for like $65 round trip on JetBlue because they have these like flash sales. So it's
right.
like just go for like 4 days. It's so cheap. Just take a carry on. You'll have fun. It's Jamaica. What's not to love? Every time I've gone to the Caribbean, I've seen so many British people there, and every time they're like, "Oh, we wanted an escape from the winter," or we even in the summer and spring they come there, and I'm like, but it's so far. It takes forever. They have to make like two or three connections to get to the Caribbean. And I'm like, why don't you just go to the Tenerife or Canary Islands or something? I mean, not in winter, but still,
Yeah,
So I've never understood that. Their penchant for traveling super far is not something I'll understand. I feel like Americans are a lot more practical about this stuff.
it's so far to get out of the United States for the most part. So
Yeah.
just across an ocean. So
We cannot do this episode without mentioning arguably the most famous movie made by a firangi director that is set and shot in India, which caused a tremendous amount of controversy, but also gave A.R. Rahman his one and only Oscar, which is, of course, Danny Boyle's Slumdog Millionaire. Like, we would be remiss if we didn't
Second, I
talk about
thought you
it.
were going to say, before you got to Raman, I was like, oh, she's going to say Temple of Doom.
Oh no. Amrish Puri, Monkey Skull. No, I'm talking about Slumdog Millionaire. Um, and of course, it gave the world Dev Patel, whom I adore, and it also gave us Preeta Pinto, who I have no opinions on. Although I will say the amount of times people have said I look like Preeta Pinto, and I'm like, you are blind. I look nothing like her.
I don't see that.
No, it's all been like white people who said to me, "You look like Preeta Pinto," and I'm like,
They
I
now know
really
an Indian
don't.
woman.
Yeah, they're like, I know an Indian woman. You're an Indian woman. You look like her. I'm like, no. So, have you seen it? I assume you have. What do you think of it?
Yeah. Again, I'm so sorry. I don't remember that one super well either. I remember a lot of people asking me about it because I was the person they knew who knew about Indian cinema, right? But
Right.
um, I have not read the book, I should say.
I haven't either.
Um, I definitely found parts of it very funny, like, the little kid and his love for Amitabh Bachchan.
Hmm.
Kapoor's character is really fun. Um, yeah, I don't have a lot of thoughts on it, to be honest, at this
Hmm.
point. And I don't really remember what I thought about it at the time. What about you?
I remember watching it and being like irritated, because it was just that very typical like parody porn, like a City of Joy, and like those kind of movies was just kind of, let's just show how India is just this like terrible hellhole. I really kind of dislike that. Um, I did like some of the I did like the underlying story of Dev Patel's character. I thought that the whole love story between him and Frida Pinto was adorable. I thought that song, Jinder Shamiyane Ke Tale, whatever, the famous song Jai Ho. I loved the way that that was shot. I loved that scene, like when she's like running at the train station. It was very satisfying to me, like from a love story point of view, and it was very like cathartic. And I was like, I hope they get together, So it would definitely like jerk some tears out of me for sure. But there were so many things about it that were just like horrific. And not to say that some of those things don't exist, but also whenever a foreign filmmaker makes a movie that is just like 90% parody porn, I always am like, do you just hate brown people?
Mhm.
And do you just want to shit on them, basically? Like, there's a literal pile of shit in this movie. And it's just kind of like this kind of refusal. Because here's the thing, right? I have no problem with foreigners, whatever, depicting like the poverty side of India. It is a country of great inequality. I mean, you can go to Mumbai and you can see Antilia, which is owned by the Ambanis, and they are the richest Asian family, like literally the most rich in the entire continent of Asia. And you see Antilia, and it is so extravagant and insane. And literally, the view from Antilia, apart from the sea, obviously, is Dharavi, which is also the greatest slum in Asia. So it's like all these like superlatives, right? Like the most grand house, but then also the biggest slum in the country, like that. Um, but it's when a filmmaker essentially only shows you one part of that story, I always wonder what the agenda is. Like, do you just have a problem? Because why aren't you showing both aspects of it? So I always find that a little bit sus. And it's possible that they don't actually have an agenda, but I think you also have to look at the larger context of it, where for so long there has been this very clear attempt at portraying India in a certain light, because it's reminiscent of how white people have in the past called black people uppity,
Right.
like you need to like stay in your lane, don't try to be better than you are. There's definitely some of that happening, right? And at the end of the day, no matter how much I rationalize things, I'm still human, I'm still emotional. And I still remember like when in 2014 that the New York Times, I remember India was sending a mission to Mars, and it was like the Mangalyaan, and it was such a massive achievement for a country which we did all by ourselves, right? Like nobody was giving us funds for it. Our scientists did it. And, we were only the fourth country in the world that was able to do that, right? Every other superpower, it was like India, Russia, China. India was the first of like the fort to do it. And I still remember like all the Indians were so happy. And I did not have a prescription subscription to the New York Times, but because I lived there, I my apartment building would have newspapers that you could just read for free. So they would have like the Wall Street Journal, whatever. There was a New York Times cartoon that still makes me upset when I think of it. It's a cartoon that resulted in a lot of people unsubscribing.
Mhm.
And it also resulted in the New York Times actually having to issue an apology, which is not
Oh.
something they do regularly, which is it shows a little like an office or a club, and there's these fat white people and they're reading a newspaper and they're just like being like, whatever, and they're reading a newspaper about India's like space program. And there's an old man dressed like an Indian peasant. He's like in a dhoti kurta, and he's holding a buffalo, like he's holding a buffalo by the, not the leash, the rope or whatever, and he's knocking on the door of that club. And it's basically like about India's space program. And I was like, wow, you have to be so freaking full of hate.
Mhm.
Like, there is no appreciation, there is no regard for this enormous scientific and technological advancement that this nation, which is a developing nation, by the way, has made, which did not receive a dime from any of the Western powers. All you can do is a mock a country which is trying so hard to make a name for themselves and that is trying to advance themselves. It was so infuriating because it's like no matter how much you achieve, there will always be someone, including a newspaper as distinguished as the New York Times, where they will try to pull you down.
Mhm.
You can, because you're too uppity, you're trying to be too good. And it just infuriated me. And so sometimes when I see movies like Slumdog Millionaire, I always have to wonder what the agenda is. It's possible that there's no agenda, but it's also possible that it's kind of like, well, we're going to show you who's actually better because you're getting out of line. So there's definitely that side of me that doesn't like it. But I think it's important to think through all of those things. I think it's important to have conversations. I have friends who fall on every side of that spectrum. I have friends who thought that Indians who hated Slumdog Millionaire were being extremely defensive. I also know people who thought Slumdog Millionaire was a terrible movie because of the points I just made. And I think it's fine to have whatever opinion you have, but I think it's better to just like discuss amongst each other and not be like you're wrong or you're wrong, but like to talk about it, right? Because I think that's better. So I think there were parts of Slumdog Millionaire I liked, but there were definitely parts of it that made me go, wow, y'all really can't stand it when brown people do well. And so you will take every opportunity you can to pull us down. And like, you know what? I freaking hate you for it. So there was definitely that very emotional reaction I had to it. And I absolutely hate the fact that like the only reason that like so many American people know A.R. Rahman is because of Jeho, like of his amazing music catalog. Jeho is a good song, don't get me wrong, but it is not even in his top 10 or 20. And for that to be his most famous, it's like, ugh, okay, whatever, I guess, but it's fine. It's like it's okay. Something is better than nothing, but still, it's a little eye rolly. Yeah, so I think that movie does exemplify some of the problematic ways that India is described, and so I do think it deserves a lot of the brickbats that came its way. But I think in terms of sheer storytelling, there were a lot of the love story between Dev Patel and Frida Pinto's character was lovely, and also I adore Dev Patel. I have seen Lion, and I cried like a
Oh
baby.
yeah.
It is such a good movie. I will not watch it again because it is too harrowing for me. But Dev Patel is good.
Yeah.
He is. So anyone who can bring Dev Patel to audiences and be like, here's this amazing new actor, I can get on board with that.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. Does that conclude this episode? I feel like it does.
No,
Oh. Oh.
because we have had a question from Blue Sky.
Ooh, okay, tell me.
It's not related to today's topic.
Oh,
This is someone on Blue Sky who goes by Way Too Filmy.
okay.
And their question is, I rewatched films often on VHS, but now rarely do. Some are sharing gems. You must watch this. Others are cozy comfort rewatches. A few are layered masterpieces, revealing new insights each time. What are your and Pitu's go-to rewatches for these three categories?
Name the categories again.
Uh, Sharing gems, so things you want others to watch. Cozy comfort watches, And of course, we have done an episode on our comfort watches.
Yeah.
We always are adding more to them sort of in passing commentary, but we do have an episode on comfort watches. And then layered masterpieces that offer new insights each time.
Okay, so the movie that I'm always telling people to watch is one of my favorites, but I will be damned if I watch it again. And that movie is Sairat. I
Uh,
love that movie. It is unbelievably good. It is just like, oh, I can't talk about how much I love this movie. It is also very harrowing, and I will not watch it again. But everybody should see Sairat once. And I remember once I was like, talking about Sairat on Instagram, and I got so many responses. Like my inbox completely got filled with like people who were like, "Oh my god, I love that movie!" So Sairat is that movie for me. Um, the second category was movies that are
um,
comfort watches.
mhm.
Oddly, I would say my favorite comfort watches are actually Hollywood movies. So I would say Jaws and Jurassic Park. I find both of them very comforting. I
But
don't know what it
Legally
says.
Blonde is what you named for
And
your.
Legally Blonde also. Yeah. So that at least shows like a more normal side of me. But the fact that I find Jaws and Jurassic Park very comforting is perhaps a little problematic. Like I don't know what that says about me, Beth, but yes. I would say like actually Hollywood movies are more comfort watches for me. So those three for sure. I also love a good like, Rocky and things like that. Like basically what I call American masala. I love a good American summer blockbuster. And then the third category was,
Masterpieces that reveal new insights each time.
I would say any of Shyam Benegal's films, with the exception of
Mhm.
Zubeda, which I don't like.
Right.
But yeah, most of Shyam Benegal's movies, every time you watch it, you notice something new.
Are there any films that you try to get others to watch that you rewatch a lot?
Just in general, you mean? I don't think so because I feel like the movies that I rewatch a lot are, like I said, the summer blockbusters, and I feel like everyone has seen them. Like I don't need to convince someone to watch Jurassic Park; they've seen it already. Yeah, I don't think there's anything that I'm necessarily telling people where they're kind of like, "What?" But it's always gratifying when we get comments on our YouTube channel and people are like, "I watched this movie because you suggested it," and I'm like, "Really? People actually listen to our suggestions? Well, that's gratifying." Because sometimes it feels like you're just talking into a void. Yeah. What about you?
Well, so I think for my sharing gem, Paheli is one that I have pointed people
Oh.
to, and even I believe I've even loaned out my DVD for that one before. So that's one that I have definitely pointed people to, and I rewatch it a fair amount myself. Comfort Watch, we just in our Rani Mukherjee episode, we were just talking about this. Aya is one of mine, and then in
Hmm.
our episode about the color yellow, I talked about Khoobsurat, which is another definitely a comfort watch for me that I've seen many times. But the movie I talked about in our Comfort Watch episode, I believe, was When Harry Met Sally, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's definitely one for me as well. And then a layered masterpiece. I mean, I'm gonna be just as obvious as you were in your answer, like Ray films. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen Charulata at least 5 times, I would say, and like every time I'm bulldozed anew and struck by something else in it. So yeah, nothing. Benegal and Ray, like nothing too
Yeah.
crazy here.
I would say for your first category, I would add Queen to that because I know for
Oh
a
yeah,
fact you've told multiple people to watch Queen.
I have
So,
told people to watch Queen, and I took an American friend to watch Queen with me who
mhm.
seen a few Indian films, but not many. So yeah, that's true.
Also, I just recollected that, like, in my first category, apart from Sairat, the other movie I keep talking about is Masan. And I chose Masan as my movie for the Gray episode. So every time someone is like, "What movie should I watch?" I'm like, "Watch Masan," and then they're like, "Okay, fine." But I don't have to convince people to watch Sairat because many people have already seen it. But Masan, it's like it's so dark and it's like it's so gray that it's a harder sell for people. But yeah, I'm always like, watch Masan. But I try not to act too cheerful because if I'm too cheerful, then they watch it and then they'll
Very
come
much
yell at me.
as they should.
Yeah, it's kind of like when I said, "Hey, do you want to watch Mrs. A Great Indian Kitchen and we'll do an episode?" And you were like, "Sure," and you had no idea what you were walking into.
Yeah, I had no idea.
Okay, I think that concludes this episode then of Firangi filmmakers shooting and setting films in India. Yeah, viewers slash listeners, tell us what you thought about this episode. Have you seen Darjeeling Limited? Do you love Wes Anderson? If not, what is wrong with you? Also, have you seen Bengali Nights? Do you also love Hugh Grant? What do we think of his Zulfe? What do we think of his foppishness? And also, can we really blame someone for being in love with Supriya Bhatak?
You cannot.
I feel like it's not fair to blame someone. Like, I'm in love with Supriya
No,
Bhatak,
and
so
if you're like a poetic young woman and Hugh Grant flops into your house, like, come on.
I feel like these characters are very blameless. I mean, yes, they're silly, but they're blameless.
No, you get it, but also you're like, and obviously, whenever you're supposed to hide your love, like that makes it more exciting, right? So,
Yeah.
like, if everyone had been like, sure, okay, you two can have a crush on each other, that none of this would have happened, right?
Yeah.
It was forbidden that it was a big.
Also, everyone loves a good star-crossed love story, especially if they're starring in it. That's always more appealing.
Right, right.
Okay, tell us what you think, and what are your thoughts on other movies? Have you seen other films that are firangi movies that are set in India? What do you think about Slumdog Millionaire? Have you seen Great Exotic Marigold Hotel? Should I watch it, or do you think I'll be annoyed? Have you seen A City of Joy? What are some of the films that you guys have seen? Just tell us, and then we will see you again next week. Bye.